handful of experts across the nation on electronic voting systems. Thank you, Garland. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Michael. Again, I want to thank you again for having me here today. This is some pretty hot news, pretty confidential information. You're going to get a preview of what you're going to probably hear a lot more about next week. So I wanted to start with the video. I don't know that everybody in the room has seen this. I want you to see the video of the Dr. Ed Felton hacking voting machines from the United States Congress. We're going to see Dr. Ed Felton, who was Dr. at Princeton University, and he is going to demonstrate before the United States House Administration Committee how a voting machine, which is the same kind of voting machine that we use here in Georgia, can be hacked without detection. And with that, maybe we'll cut the lights and then I'll let you see this and then we'll probably go from there.
From a security standpoint, what distinguishes computerized voting systems from traditional systems is not that computers are easier to compromise, but that the consequences of compromise can be so much more severe. Tampering with an old-fashioned ballot box can affect a few hundred votes at most, but injecting a virus into a single computerized voting machine can potentially affect an entire election. 2 weeks ago, my colleagues Ari Feldman and Alex Halderman and I released a detailed security analysis of this machine, the Diebold AccuVote TS, which is used in Maryland, Georgia, and elsewhere. My written testimony summarizes the findings of our study. One main finding is that the machines are susceptible to computer viruses that spread from machine to machine and silently transfer votes from one candidate to another. Such a virus requires moderate computer programming skills to construct. Launching it requires access to a single voting machine for as little as 1 minute. I will now demonstrate this using a virus we constructed in our laboratory. We've set up here a simulated election for president between George Washington and Benedict Arnold. It's election day morning and we just opened the polls. No votes have been cast yet. I'll start by casting the first vote. When I checked in at the polling place at the front desk, the poll workers gave me this voter card, which I now insert into the machine. I press the start button, and I choose to cast my vote for George Washington. The machine asks me to confirm my choice, and I confirm my choice and cast my ballot. The second vote is similar. I insert another voter card. I choose George Washington again, and again I confirm and cast my ballot. The third voter inserts another voter card and votes again for George Washington. The correct vote count in this election, obviously, is George Washington 3, Benedict Arnold 0. Now it's the close of election day. A poll worker inserts a special supervisor card into the machine. Enters a PIN code, and tells the machine to end the election and tally the votes. The machine will now print out a paper tape summarizing the ballot count. When I cast my votes earlier, my choice of candidate was recorded in the machine's electronic memory. This record of my vote was invisible to me. I had no way of verifying whether it was recorded correctly or whether it was changed after it was recorded. In this machine, the records were modified by our virus. This paper tape, printed out by the machine, reports the election's result. And it shows George Washington with 1 vote and Benedict Arnold with 2.
So there you have it. Basically, we'll probably just go ahead and leave the lights off, Kim, for a little bit. There you have it. Basically, an election was hacked right in front of everyone's eyes in front of the United States Congress with a simple virus that they had added to the voting machine. Now, the most important thing I want to tell you about that is that you do not need access to the voting machine to hack an election. And that's what I want to talk about today. And we're going to walk through a little bit about how to accomplish that without ever touching a machine, and how this could have been accomplished for the last few years. So the most important thing to do is understand how elections are prepped in the state of Georgia, because you keep hearing that the machines are not connected to the internet, they have physical security, which all of this is true, but it's irrelevant to or immaterial to the point that we're talking about. So this is how elections are prepped today. They are prepped from, have been ever since every election's been cast in Georgia on the voting machine. They're prepped from the Kennesaw State Center for Election Systems. Center for Election Systems is a little autonomous unit that operates, it is part of Kennesaw State, but it kind of reports to the Secretary of State and not to the University System of Georgia. So they prep the machines, and they prep them in two different ways. They send the counties the elections databases, and they allow the counties to download through the internet the voter registration information. And they tell you that it's not connected to the internet. It is, the preparation is connected. And then those, once the counties get the voter registration information, they put them on these flashcards. The flashcards then are inserted into the poll books, and those poll books, when you go into the precinct to vote, they generate the yellow memory access card, which y'all are all familiar with, and you stick in the machine, and that allows you to cast one vote. It then resets, and they will authorize another vote. So that's what the little yellow cards do. The elections databases come to the counties as well. The counties then prep using their gen servers, the information that goes into the memory cards. The memory cards which accumulate the votes are then put into the machines for every election. So that's basically how the elections are prepped. So you have two different ways to touch every voting machine in the state of Georgia for every election, with no one is saying anything about that. So if this particular organization has a vulnerability, then it subjects the entire state of Georgia to a single point of attack. So if you can compromise anything at the Center for Election Systems, you can compromise every election and every voting machine in the state of Georgia without detection and without physical access to any voting machine. Now that's a big F, but let's see where this goes.
Garland, can I just clarify something as far as the KSU thing?
Yes.
KSU has a separate room, okay? They're only responsible of housing these servers. And the Secretary of State, they actually hired an intern and paid him $28,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
That intern was responsible for supervising that whole thing. The Secretary of State was never there, but that intern was hired under the Secretary of State. So it was, KSU had nothing to do with, it was only a home for the servers.
I'm sorry, there's only what?
It's a home for the servers.
Yeah, so do you know the name of the intern?
No.
Okay.
Was he employed?
He was employed through Secretary of State.
Right.
KSU.
Are you talking about here in Georgia?
What do you mean here in
Yes.
Georgia?
Kennesaw State.
Yeah.
Well, Merrill King is the guy that did run that.
Correct.
Is he still there?
Merle has left.
Yeah, that's the most arrogant individual you'll ever meet in your
Yeah.
life.
And a lot of those people have been moved into the Secretary of State, or some of them. But as you were saying, the whole CES group is funded by the Secretary of State's office, and it reports to. It's not just that intern, but we have a
They
contract.
work for the Secretary of State.
If I may suggest, we hold our comments till Garland.
I just
let's
wanted to
go-
clarify that.
And Ms. Garland wants comments as he goes along.
Right, well, if it's a quick one, we'll just clarify. But yeah, so this, the Center for Election Systems is an autonomous unit, as I said, that reports to the Secretary of State. So let's go back to the single point of attack. Bottom lines are, counties don't have any security procedures to verify that what they get from Center for Election Systems is in fact actually secure. So the attacker who gains access can compromise the system as we just talked about. Now, the one other thing that's important to know is these counties do logic and accuracy testing on the voting machines. However, these types of hacks can be delivered in election mode. When the counties test, they test only in test mode. So, as they're testing, they then finish and put the machine into election mode. So Dr. Felton, Professor Williams, who put the machines in, and Will King have all admitted under oath and acknowledged that the machines can count differently in test mode and than they can in election mode. So therefore, all that logic and accuracy testing is not really worth anything. It can be compromised. So, as y'all know, there was an exposure. You've probably heard something about this. So let's start with the public information that we have readily available, and then we'll deep dive into it. August 28th, there was an information security expert named Logan Lamb, and he noticed a vulnerability, which we'll talk about exactly what that was. It's pretty significant, very significant. He contacted the CES director, Merrill King, and he said, basically, you've got a problem here. So Merle King then said, okay, thank you, I'll take care of that. But in March 1 of 2017, nothing had been done. The exposure was still there. Another colleague of Logan Lamb named Christopher Grayson found that out, told Logan about it. Grayson then contacted Andy Green, who was a professor at Kennesaw State, and he contacted the Chief Information Security Officer of KSU, that goes by the term UITS. So Stephen Gay, who was the chief there, called in the FBI and gave them the server. On March 31st, KSU issued a press release saying that the KS officials were notified on March 1, they notified the Secretary of State's office, and no illegal activity occurred. That's what we know publicly. A few issues with the public statement. It said that the KSU officials were notified on March 1. In reality, we're going to see in just a second that the security chief, the UITS security chief, Stephen Gray, was actually notified on August the 28th. There is no evidence that they notified the Secretary of State's office, that the CES notified the Secretary of State's office, which would be their responsibility. And they said no illegal activity occurred. However, there was no forensic risk assessment to determine whether any illegal activity had occurred in the past. There was only an assessment that Logan Lamb did not commit any illegal activity. So a few misleading things there. Going a little bit deeper. So when this all came about on August 28th, the CES director, Michael Barnes, who's now with the Secretary of State's office, when he found out about Logan Lamb, his immediate response was to ask the security chief to blacklist Logan Lamb and Bastille from access. Now, remember, Logan was the one who reported the vulnerability, called Merle King, and the director asked to blacklist them so they could not have access to any more machines. He then later withdrew that request because he realized that was not really appropriate. You want to blacklist the people who are trying to help you. Again, and that was never actually implemented. Stephen Gate called in the FBI. The FBI then in turn investigates land to determine if any crime was committed. They didn't do any forensic risk assessment. They just determined whether a crime was committed. They found out there was not. On March the 15th, the CES director contacted Gay, who had given the server to the FBI. And he says, we don't have a backup of any of this elections data that was all sitting on this public web server. So on March 17th, the FBI returned the server to KSU so that the Center for Election Systems could actually have the data that they had no backup of. Now that's all of our election data in the state of Georgia. So on July 3rd,
Okay, it's turned off.
So on July 3, a lawsuit was filed. It was readily available on July 5th. July 7th, UITS and CES together destroyed the data. We're going to see all about how that happened. On August 8th, there was a removal of the case to federal court at the request of the state attorney general. And on August 9, UITS magnetically deleted all the data on the initial server. Now, this was done without regard to the Secretary of State's data retention policies. So that should have been available and knowledgeable by both CES and UITS because they are, in fact, called out clearly in the contract, which we have. When Brian Kipp found out about this, eventually, which didn't occur until October 26th, he said that this was reckless behavior, inexcusable conduct, gross incompetence, and undeniable aptitude. I'm going to read to you his statement. The Secretary of State's office had no involvement in this decision, and we would never direct someone to take such action. This pattern of reckless behavior is exactly why we are ending our relationship with KSU and the Center for Election Systems and moving functionality in-house. Remember, that's the same functionality that's still exposed. Not only did KSU officials fail to notify us of the server vulnerabilities when they first learned of the problem, they failed again to notify us when they decided to wipe the compromised server and the backup server. We will not stand for this kind of inexcusable conduct or gross incompetence. Earlier today, we opened an internal investigation. I'm going to show you that in just a second. On this new incident at KSU, those responsible at KSU should be held accountable for their actions. The Secretary of State's office is also coordinating with the FBI officials to get our own copy of the data that was erased at KSU, which they still have not gotten. Despite the undeniable ineptitude of KSU's Center for Election Systems, Georgia's elections are safe and our systems remain secure. As Secretary of State, I will continue to lead around-the-clock efforts to keep it that way. Sorry for boring you, but I wanted you to hear that. That was October the 26th. On 4 days later, October 31st, his investigation is released and it says that this was standard procedure. Totally conflicting every single thing that he just said. Every single thing. What had happened in the meantime in those 2 days? Immediately after he made that comment, the Attorney General resigned from defending the Secretary of State's office. He said there was a conflict between the Center for Election Systems and the Secretary of State's office. Well, who does the Center for Election Systems report to?
Secretary of State.
The Secretary of State. And so Brian Kemp had just indicted himself publicly and he's facing a lawsuit. So what did they really find here? What is this all really about? So we've got a deep dive into it, so you'll know. When Logan Lamb did his check, and he downloaded some information and checked in and reported it back to Merle King, what he found was he could get access without password protection to the voter registration database of all 6.7 million voters. Current election databases he found that are sent to the counties to accumulate the results of elections. Windows executables that are used, any recipient can use to create election databases, PDFs of memos containing recent election day supervisor passwords, and training videos of how to download the files, put them on memory cards, and insert them into county voting machines. All of this was readily available on the internet, and it had been available on the internet for years. The website content management system called Drupal had a security flaw. It allowed an attacker, as he found out, to have a free rein to execute, create, modify, and delete any files whatsoever. So basically, everything you needed to hack an election was available since that server had been implemented 5 years later with Drupal, and probably even longer than that, because the flaw likely existed on the previous server. So, if you were to encounter that, and you were the Center for Election Systems Director, or the UITS Security Chief, I would expect the standard procedure to be that you would perform a forensic risk assessment. What would that look like? Here's just a sample of the things that you would probably do, or make sure that you would do, if you were a CES director or a security chief. You'd want to identify the duration of the exposed vulnerability. You'd want to determine if an unauthorized breach had occurred, and you can do that using audit logs. You want to identify the source of the unauthorized breach using the IP addresses of whoever came in. You can do that. That's all available. You want to define when these unauthorized breaches may have occurred using timestamps. Access the impact of any breach. What's the impact on the application and data owners, and implement a remediation strategy to compensate for that breach if one occurred. That would be what I would call a sample forensic risk assessment. That was not done. So in the investigative report, to look at this breach that the Secretary of State had, they made a few conclusions. I'll show you the report. So this is what we consider to be probably the greatest potential election fraud case in the history of Georgia. And the Secretary of State did a report on it. So you would expect it to be pretty significant, wouldn't you?
Right.
Well, here it is.
What?
Page 1 and page 2. This is the report.
Oh,
Let's you want to cut the light on for that one, Ken?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So again, this is the greatest potential election fraud case in the history. And the Secretary of State's report has 1 page and 2 pages. That's it. And and half of this is redundant. One of them is a summary. So let's go back and look at the what was actually in this 2-page report that came from the Secretary of State's office. They said that KSU IT acted in accordance with standard IT procedures. I want to just point out the fact that this is not the whole IT department. We're just talking about really the security office and the Center for Election Systems. He said that the concern was that the data was lost is unfounded because the FBI has got an image. Given that these conclusions, the narrative that the media has put out the data was nefariously deleted is no longer, and it's no longer available, it's completely false without merit. So let's look at each one of these. Standard procedures, by almost anyone's account, would require forensic risk assessment before deleting the data. The data, the concern about the data being lost is unfounded. Well, actually, it was lost. We're going to see that the data was magnetically destroyed on August the 9th without a backup on one of the servers. And the Secretary of State's office never could acquire, by the report's own admission, the data from the FBI. They still have not gotten it. So based on that, the media narrative is really true. It's not false. So who authored this report? I think the report is actually a bigger issue than the destruction of the data. The report was authored by Ryan Germany. He is the chief legal counsel to Secretary Kemp. He is not an elections investigator. He is involved primarily in securities investigations. And we found out that he has never been sworn to oath in office as an official, which the judge may want to comment later on when we're done. So I want to look at the defects and the problems with this report in 2 pages. Again, this report was created in 2 pages in 3 business days to analyze this breach. 2 pages in 3 business days. It did not investigate why CES had no backup of their critical data. It did not investigate why no forensic assessment was taken. It didn't investigate why the Security Department and CES violated the Secretary of State's data retention policies, which are in the contract with CES and Secretary of State's office. And it failed to acquire a copy of the destroyed data, even though that data was available. Furthermore, in just procedural violations, when that 2-page report was set up, Ryan Germany failed to identify the complainant of the report. Who was the complainant? Who was complaining about this? Obviously, it was Secretary Kemp. However, he chose not to identify who wanted the investigation on it. He also chose not to identify the respondents at KSU or CES or UITS who were being investigated. He didn't identify the impact of the data destruction, what the elections were that were affected. He failed to include any documents in the 2-page report that he reviewed as exhibits. He didn't disclose any individuals at KSU who were contacted, the security or the Center for Election Systems. And we found out that he initiated no communications with anyone at KSU or UITS, CES, to investigate this matter, because we went back and pulled, by open records request, who did he talk to in this time period at KSU, the Center for Election Systems or the Security Department? Did he talk to anybody to make this conclusion? We got back nothing. The chief legal counsel from the Kansas State said, sorry, you did not contact us. We have no documents. So, basically what we concluded, and I'll end it here, was that this investigation was not credible. The report, we can cut the lights on. So what we eventually concluded was the investigation was not credible. The report is fraudulent, and the Secretary of State's office is involved currently in a cover-up of this whole matter. So you'll be hearing a lot more about this next week, I think. But this is a preview of what's coming. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Garland,
want to thank you. The amount of work that Garland has put into this.
Amen.
is
Amazing.
absolutely incredible. So we're going to start on this side of the room with Johnny and work our way around.
The voter registration list, that's a matter of public record. I'm wondering about the social security numbers. If that's a voter registration list,
The
is that
voter,
public record?
yes, the social security numbers were exposed for a matter of years.
So if you go in and get a list of the voter, I know you can get the voter registration list. Do they censor the part with the social security numbers when they release it to the public?
Yes, absolutely, they do. But if you knew how to access the voter registration database through this security
You can get
flaw,
like the whole state's social security numbers.
exactly, you would have every social security number in the state of Georgia.
Garland, could you flip back to that, I think it was the second and third plate that was the data flow
Yes.
diagram. So I guess my question would be, it looks to me like there's probably a number of vulnerabilities, if I understand it correctly. This flash card on the left-hand side, can you hit those lights for a second?
Yes, do you want to shut the lights again?
Kind of hard to see that, so.
This is real key.
So, how's the card flash? Where does that, is that via the internet?
The flash, the internet takes place before the card is flashed.
Okay.
So the internet, I'm gonna try to get over here. The internet is the counties download the information
Okay.
to fill out the poll books, and this is what the Secretary of State's office will not tell you. They then have their own voter registration database, create the flashcards from the voter registration database, and install them into the poll books.
Okay, so that flash card in any given county is a vulnerability, and the chain of custody will need to be understood?
Yeah, the chain of custody is important there, and probably, but the biggest hole is probably the fact that they were downloading from an unsecure, public website. Normally, this is such an egregious violation of basic internet system design principles.
Yeah.
Normally, you would always have your application data behind a firewall on a separate server
Yeah.
from your public website. They had put all of their information on the same server, the application data and the public server, and exposed that to everybody with the number.
Yeah, and I guess I'm looking at the whole thing as a system and saying, well, if in the past we had a semi-reliable system that used a paper artifact, in this instance, unless we're doing forensic imaging at the county level, then we don't really have anything we can rely on in terms of physical evidence, right? So.
Absolutely, and that's the issue it's been all along with the voting machines. You have no way to verify that something nefarious did or did not happen.
Yeah, so if we're gonna re-engineer this system, then we need folks that understand the supply chain management aspect in terms of the chain of custody that has to occur for each of those components, plus the data flow aspects of, so.
Absolutely, and that's the most important point that's worth emphasizing here. The counties have no procedure to determine whether the information they got is secure. There is no procedure whatsoever, so the centralized database could have been compromised, and they would have no way to know. They're just going to take the data and load it.
And we currently have had for a number of years, blockchain trust and ways to do that. We're just not using that, so.
Exactly. Thank you, Jim, good question. Can we go back? Yes. I'm sorry, let's go. Go ahead.
Two questions. Is KSU still involved? And opinion, was KSU culpable in all of this?
Well, no, KSU, that's what I was trying to distinguish. KSU was not themselves culpable. The major culpability is with the Center for Election System, which is the autonomous unit that rules the Secretary of State.
But there are individuals there.
There is some culpability from the securities chief of KSU, UITS, because he was the one that put the plan in motion to destroy the data. Now, the communications don't appear to exist between the Center for Election Systems. So the Center for Election Systems should have been all over this. they should have been wanting to do a forensic risk assessment. They should have been notifying the security officer that they wanted to do that. They just had no objections whatsoever and just went along with everything.
And is KSU still engaged?
The Secretary of State is moving that in right now. However, some of the key players who are involved in this at the Center for Election Systems are now employed within the Secretary of State's office. So they just moved the problem. This is classic government, isn't it?
Right.
They moved the problem, but they still have the problem. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Garland, thank you for coming. My daddy always told me, follow the money and you'll get the whole story. I think we all know that. The older I get, the more that is true. Using that, if we step back from this, one step behind it, and look at the systems themselves, the voting systems, and I refer to former Secretary of State Massey and Mike Bowers, former Attorney General. They're key players in all this, in my estimation, and I want to know your opinion in terms of just how much involvement they still have in making sure that this thing gets covered up.
Yeah, good question. So Louis Massey is now representing another voting system vendor named Unison. So he is not representing the current voting system vendor anymore, which is very interesting. The current voting system vendor is ES&S is being represented now by Georgia Link, which is a very powerful lobbying firm down there. So Massey's involvement appears to now be limited. And then the Bowers family, they were huge supporters of Karen Handel at the time and were deeply involved in that. Of course, that was a lobbying firm for the vendor as well. Massey and Bowers formed that partnership after they got the deal, as you already know. So, and we talked about before. So I'd say that both of their lobbying influence is now reduced. And the lobbying firm that we are extremely concerned about is Georgia Link, because they are, we think, in control of the bill languages that came out of this last session. So we're worried about Georgia Link, we're worried about ES&S, because they're trying to sell, as y'all know, I think if you saw the presentation, the new voting machines, unverifiable voting agreements, will have the votes embedded in barcodes. So they'll give you a paper receipt, but once let's say they use a touch screen, they get the paper receipt, you throw it in the optical scanner, but your votes that you verify, what they're saying is, are not actually the votes that you see, but they're actually votes that are tabulated in the barcode. So that's unverifiable voting all over again. It's just a new way to have unverifiable voting.
Yeah, it's repackaged.
And it's exactly, and it's like, now it's like 50 million to 150 million. We literally were about that close to getting that deal done. We had fought that tooth and nail. If it wasn't for so many people who called in, hundreds of people called into the Rules Committee and called into Boston's office, and we stopped that bill. But it would have, it didn't require it to be done, but it legalized with some loopholes that type of equipment. We thought we had shut that down in the Senate. Michael Williams put an amendment on there. The Ethics Committee passed it. But when it got to the House, we found another little loophole, and the House they did not want to close that because ES&S had so much influence on that House language. And
Where's our COM delegation standing on all of this as a follow-up question, Greg?
Well, unfortunately, Ed Setzler he's the chief of the technology, House Technology Committee, and we were negotiating with him, and he was very receptive to us, but he basically was the person who shut down all of the improvements that we needed in the language in the House.
Setzler did.
Yeah, we had cooperation with the Senate, but Ed was instrumental in not allowing any of these changes to go forward.
I know.
I know that's hard to believe because he's been working with us for years, so we were But that's really the way,
Okay, so I need to come
the
by.
way it went down. So we're,
1 o'clock, need to let it come by. 12 o'clock.
we're moving this way. Any other questions? I guess we can always go back.
What's the next step? Not just, first off, I'd love to get a copy of this and share it with some of my uplines who work, they're all around the lobbyists and all, and I would love to give them the information that I can.
You'll have it on Monday. You'll have a study. What I didn't tell you is we're coming out with a study.
Yes.
It's a 15-page study to analyze a 2-page report.
And the Madison Forum will publish that.
Yeah, you'll have it from Michael probably by Monday afternoon.
Okay.
It's all complete, it's done, it's been edited, everything's ready to go, it's got a pretty cover page. It's ready to roll, it's similar to some other stuff that you might have seen. So that'll be available Monday. We're hoping that you'll hear about this in the news next week.
But what do you see as a next step for individuals? Individuals who are hearing this information possibly for the first time, is this something that you've got a group that's already taking the ball and running with it, or is this?
I would like everybody to start just calling the Secretary of State's office and pounding them as to come forward and explain this report. Explain how you could have produced a 2-page report on this breach or this potential breach and this fault. How could you have done that, and why are there so many, how do you justify that that was not a cover-up? I've never seen as clear a cover-up as this that I can recall at either the federal or the state level. So I would like to see everybody hounded, and just, and we'll just get this in as wide and far as we can, as fast as we can. I don't think that's going to happen.
Actually, I think we've seen that that's a very real possibility. What's that? We're going to become governor.
With the voting machines.
Oh.
Oh, no.
Very interesting presentation from a
Wow.
more holistic perspective, stepping back. Is a suggestion that there's a protection of a billion-dollar contract that's just trying to avoid obvious vulnerabilities of that contract? Or is the suggestion more nefarious that there's an undermining by not having a human readable artifact, not machine readable, but human readable artifact, that the whole democratic process is being undermined intentionally? I mean, what is the theory of the case here?
Well, actually, probably both. This particular one goes to the human readable. I'm glad you used those 2 words. Those are key words that we put into the legislation. And if you cast a vote, it's got to be human readable. And that tabulator's got to tabulate the human readable vote, not something that's hidden in a barcode or something that you can't see in the machine. It's got to tabulate what you actually saw. And of course, the digital scanners and optical scanners, they do all that. So, you have to start asking the question. I have a whole different presentation that we go through on this, but you have to start asking the question, why would the Secretary of State's office be so emphatically behind these machines and refuse to change? We have met, Michael and I have gone down with Jack and David Staver and Bill Hudson and Susan Stanton. And we've met with Ryan Kemp when he first came into office. Said, Brian, you need to fix this. If you fix this and move petition account to be a great Secretary of State. And so he said he didn't run on that issue. We'll keep going around.
Garland, you may want to have
He has.
He's very interested in doing the right thing.
You may not want to answer this question, or you may not be allowed by Madison rules to answer this question. So if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But is there there's a campaign for a new Secretary of State going on right now. Is there any hope that whoever wins that office is going to address this?
Yes, there is some hope. How can I word this within Madison?
Yeah.
When you're looking at the candidates, one candidate should stand out. You got to have somebody who qualifies. He's got to understand election law, he's got to understand election procedures, and he's got to understand election technology. And that's the main thing, number one. Number two, you got to be able to trust that guy or gal to do the job. So if you look at that criteria, I think Canada's going to stand out more than anyone else. And we're working with all the candidates to try to help them. But one in particular is really standing out. I think everybody's already voting for that person anyway, from what I'm seeing on the polls.
Boyd, you go ahead.
Garland, again, you may not want to answer this, but are you supporting Kemp for governor?
This has been our problem. We've had nice guys or nice people in there who are not qualified. Right after after the Republicans moved in, we needed to elect a guy or a person, lady, whoever, that was qualified, that would have gone after the Masseys and the whoever, and it could have been cleaned up. And that's the problem today, as he just said. We've got 4, and they're fine people. I know, we've known them for 20 years. They're all nice people, but only one is qualified. And he will go after some of this. And he's been taking a beating down there for a long time.
Yes, Jim.
You know, further to what Michael said, first of all, brother, we've known you for many years, and you're a John Charge dog, and we appreciate that. When you bite, they can cut you to this, you will let go. Well, anyway, these are the die hard. You know what? There are 755,000 people in Cobb County. This room here this morning is such an important issue or subject because it's for a right to vote and express your wishes in a free manner. Should be standing room only. That's the problem.
For those of you who do not know Jim Soretti, he's from Cuba. He was a lawyer and a policeman in Cuba when Fidel Castro came in. And he and his father were taken out in the backyard by the Castro regime police. And they held their submachine guns on them. They thought they were going to be killed.
Me too.
Okay. And there's another part of that story, but he's here today, thank God.
But anyway,
Muy hombre.
but anyway, until such time, and this is a very complicated issue, the bottom thing, but until such time as the people get interested in what's going on, which affects their life every day. Politics affects everybody's life every day.
Yep.
People don't believe that, but it's true.
I know Judge Nellie's got some questions, so let's go ahead.
If I can pick up on what these two gentlemen said, I've been giving some thought to why we're having all these problems in the 21st century. 200 plus years ago, our founding fathers had basically 3 choices looking back at the broadest perspective. They could choose an autocracy, which they had a lot of experience with, and they rejected because they didn't like King George of England. They could choose a pure democracy because they thought it was unworkable and impractical. And they chose a representative democracy, otherwise known as a republic. Now, there are certain requirements for, it seems to me, a republic to function properly, and one of those is you have to trust the people that you're electing. I think that's been lost. I think everything we're talking about here is we don't trust the people that we are putting in office to represent our interests. And I'm getting involved in a congressional race over here, and I think we've got a member of the congressional delegation who thinks his job is to represent Washington to us, and we think his job is to represent us to Washington. So we have a fundamental difference in how we view his responsibilities. The other thing that I think has been lost is there's a requirement for a republic to work, and that is the vast majority of Americans have to put the national interest first, not these partisan stuff and not this factionalism that we've gotten into, but the nation's interest comes first. The founding fathers believed that you're either a selfish individual or you're a patriotic individual, and that those two are antonyms for each other. And I think, and we started this meeting, well, I guess we may have neglected to, but most of the meetings we start by pledging allegiance to that flag. That flag stands for the entire nation, even people who don't agree with us ideologically. And I think we've gotten into this thing of hating other fellow Americans who adhere to a different ideology or belong to a different political party than we do, as opposed to searching out areas of common interest and saying, okay, let's put those aside and let's focus on the things that we do agree on. And term limits is one example, and I don't say that because I'm a big advocate of term limits, even though I am, but because polls show that Americans across the political spectrum agree that term limits for members of Congress is a good idea. And yet we're never going to get it through this Congress because they're looking out for themselves, number one. There's a poll that came out a couple of years ago that said 85% of the American public believes that our political leaders are more interested in preserving and protecting their power and privilege than they are with doing the work of the American people. That would be the work that they were elected to do. And so I think we've got a very big problem to get this country turned around and to make representative democracy work in the 21st century.
In regard to a criminal code section that I sent to you the other day,
This man.
and since it seems that there may be a failure of evidence to prove collusion between the head and the body, it occurs to me that if a grand jury knows that an individual has or believes an individual has information that can make that causal connection, that and that information does not act as an incriminating factor against the individual who has the information, that grand jury can compel that testimony.
Remember, collusion is not a crime.
Yeah, right.
There's
So-
a statute on the books that says collusion is a
So the
crime.
question is, if he doesn't want to, if an individual doesn't want to voluntarily testify as to some particular acts that he may have knowledge of, would he give truthful testimony if compelled by a grand jury? That's how you may get your evidence. And then you can take action on that code section.
Well, it sounds like we already have enough on 1511-1 right now.
Garland, can't tell you how much.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you.